Gayla, today is a sad day in a lot of ways. I know you were very young and it was a long time ago, but can you recall what was unfolding for your family on this day 40 years ago, how the news about Jamey was received and how it was shared?
I just remember a flurry of phone calls throughout my family because Jamie is related to me on my mother's side and my father's side. So she's my first cousin, double kin. So my whole family was in just a panic trying to figure out what had happened.
And there was a call the night before where Jamey was on the phone saying, "This is all a misunderstanding. They're going to let me go. I'll be fine." So I think there was probably a lot of hope that she was going to be okay. And then it was crushed.
Well, I think the women in my family were hopeful, but I remember my dad and Jamie's father, James, and my uncle Richard saying no, because we were so happy and celebrating, and they said no, we're not celebrating till she's back in front of us. They were very skeptical.
I can't imagine the grief as it spread through the family. I mean, as I said, you were very young, but Jamey was sort of a role model for you, right?
She was, because Jamie's mother, Eleanor, was my mom's older sister, and James was my father's uh, older brother. So we were raised more like brother and sister than cousins. She was a cheerleader. She knew she wanted to go away to a historically Black college. I was a cheerleader with her at Clark High School. And so my sister and I definitely knew we were following in her footsteps when it came to our college trajectory. And so we just looked up to her because she was a good kid. She was 17 years old and I was 7, and she would take me around to the parties after the game and make sure it was appropriate for me and take me to the pep rallies. She really was an extraordinary girl.
She's like, yeah, she was pardon me, sorry about that. She was, cheerleader, a good student. She was active in civil rights as other members of your family, other generations have been. Just a role model for a lot of people and a genuinely good girl, as you said, not somebody who would be hanging around with the kind of people who would do something like this to her.
Yes, Jamie was a church-going girl too. She actually had her own church that she went to. um, and she actually was afraid of the man that did this to her. He was a neighbor near her, and she said to her friend Cheryl, "This guy gives me the creeps," one day. And she told my mother that a couple of days before she was kidnapped and murdered.
And he showed up at the house that night, right? The night she was abducted, he showed up, knocked on the
Yeah.
door.
Yes.
Your Aunt Eleanor worked tirelessly for decades to solve the crime. And like the police, she had several suspects in mind in the beginning, but then she narrowed it down to Willie Shannon. And by the time I met her, she was pretty certain that Shannon was responsible. Was that true for the rest of the family? Did everyone pretty much assume that he was the guy who did it?
I think the family members on my mom's side didn't really know much about it because they weren't at the clubs that my grandmother owned. But my father's side had narrowed it down to some people, but I spoke to former assistant attorney, district attorney Cuomo, and he told me there were so many people on that list. There were like 50 people on the list. But my father and my uncles had narrowed it down to like 10 or 15 people that they really thought had done it. And Willie Shannon was one of those people.
Eleanor, by the time that I got to know her well, was certain it was Shannon. And then she really kept the police on it. Not that they needed a lot of force to keep them interested in the case. They were interested, but she really drove that train and kept kept stories from people like me in the media, kept Jamey's memory alive. And on the day that she was scheduled to give a deposition, finally do something that would put the perpetrator away, she died same day. Really ironic in a sense and sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of sad ironies in this case, but it is very sad.
You were there for the plea deal hearing and the sentencing. Tell me what that was like for your family when you finally heard that he was going to do time.
It was extremely upsetting for the family because they didn't necessarily understand the Alford plea. And I understood very well what it was. And I understood that he might not do much time, which he didn't. So the family was just upset. They knew Eleanor would never have accepted that. And there had been some undercurrents when this first happened, when Jamey was killed, while they were supposed to be investigating it. And then when they were prosecuting it, what would this have looked like if this had been a white girl from a prominent family instead of a Black girl from a fairly historically prominent family? Maybe not a wealthy family, but a well-to-do prominent Black family. That would this sentencing have been different? Would it have been viewed different? Would it have been tried differently? And now with all the things in the news, I think it's a fair thing to wonder.
I remember being with your family that day, and there was some sense of relief that at least he was convicted on the record and going to do some time, but really a lot of emotions about the nature of the sentence. And then there was a parole hearing, and this parole board, after you and others spoke, they rejected the idea of his release. And then a couple of months later, he got released anyway, and the family was not informed. You must have been really mad about not being kept in the loop.
Well, we were informed. I got a letter 2 days after they let him out. Oh. And so that was very offensive. And just, I've struggled with this intensely my whole life, but especially as an adult. So I said that was just a Pandora's box I didn't even want to open, because my initial reaction, because they call me EW for Eleanor Walker, that I'm little Eleanor, my mind started spinning. I wanted to contact you. I wanted to put this on the news and do a follow-up to say what a shame it was. But just for my own mental wellness, I just let it go. And
does anyone in your family try to keep tabs on Shannon, or try to, watch the news or call around to see what he's up to, see if he's caused any more harm, or have you tried to put him out of your mind?
That person would have been me, but I was not very well throughout the whole court trials that I had, a lot of very difficult times. So this time around, my family, especially my husband, they were very against me trying to keep up with this man. That it was cathartic for me, especially, and for my family, for the whole world to know that you did it. Even though you got away with it, we know without a shadow of a doubt that it was you. We have DNA to know that it was you who took a 90-pound kid and raped her, kidnapped her, and threw her off of a cliff. So, I'm sure my family would like to have seen him get the death penalty or life in prison without parole. But I could see as the trial went on that was not going to happen.
Yeah, he's returned to his family, his kids, to live out his life. And, we heard in court that all the corrections officers really liked him, that he had turned his life around and was a really good guy. And it must have been hard to hear all that stuff.
It was hard to hear, in that I hope that he is not around other children or girls, because he's definitely a predator. Willie Shannon was known all throughout West Las Vegas, historic West Side, that he would rape girls. And there were 2 women that called us during the trial, and another one Facebooked my dad's cousin saying that he had raped her. So we know about 3 or 4 women who he raped. And then he went to prison not long after he killed Jamey for raping a girl, I believe, at Doolittle Community Center. It was very similar. So
Metro was criticized in the beginning by your community, by your family. You know, it hadn't solved the case. There were accusations. They were dragging their feet. As I said, I have seen the files. They worked it pretty hard. There were a series of cold case detectives that continued to work it for years. They zeroed in on Shannon, and they did a number of different DNA tests. And finally, the technology caught up to it, and they got enough to put him away. How do you evaluate Metro's performance on this after all this time?
Most of my family would disagree with me, but I felt like you were so generous with me. Frank Cuomo was so generous with me that I felt like I saw evidence that the case was worked. If anything, I believe that our community betrayed us because my family did so much for the Black community, even after they had prospered and was able to move to a nicer place than the historic West Side. My family stayed connected. And I feel like the West Las Vegas community failed us in that I know there were people that knew and they never told, because I know there's 2 other people that were involved and they were never found, even though I have my suspicions that the person, the woman that I suspected, I believe she had something to do with it. She had a crush on Willie Shannon and she alibied him.
Yeah, Shannon did a little bit of time, but the 2 other ones got away. And there are people who know who they are who just have not come forward and said anything.
Yeah. And I have forgiveness for them too, because they may still be afraid of him.
Today, just our final question today, is your family thinking about Jamey? Remembering her? Is there any get together, or just you're all individually kind of?
I think we're all individually scarred. I think it's going to take another generation. I have a 24-year-old daughter named Jamey who is, approaching that age, thinking about, being out. She's out on her own. One day she'll maybe get married and have her own family. I think it'll take that generation to fully be able to embrace Mother's Day, because for us, it has been a day of curse and just violence and sad memories.
Gayla, thanks for talking to us. Please give my regards to your family on this day.
I will. Thank you so much, sir. We want to thank you for hanging in there and always having my Aunt Eleanor's back, and your professionalism has been stellar, and we appreciate it.